Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'm going to be sharing Bigfoot stories. Let's get into it. Story 1. This happened in September 2004 on Labor Day weekend. My friend and I, he's a zoology student, decided to spend part of our vacation time negotiating the Bemis Valley Trail. It's a tough climb for those of us not used to frequent alpine climbs. Roughly like 12 to 15 mile loop through rugged country, the four peaks of Bemis are breathtakingly beautiful in the autumn. We took a side trail down to Mooselook-Maguntic Lake and arrived in time to watch the sun going down. We tacked down a two-man tent. As we talked about turning in early, exhausted from the day's hike, we heard movement, then saw a huge man-shaped shadow approaching the water's edge of the lake. I asked Jim who he thought that was. We hadn't seen any other hikers around and this thing was huge. We stared briefly, then he grabbed my hand. "Get in the tent," he said. "Why? What is that?" He shushed me to be very quiet and we watched, being very still. The dark figure waded into the water, stood very still for the longest time. Then suddenly, like a shot, it took a header with arms down by its side, head first into the lake. It was a huge splash. The ripples faded along with the last rays of daylight, and yet we kept staring into the darkening lake with wonder. How truly bizarre. I'm not used to seeing anything like that. I'm a city person. Jim, however, was raised in the country. His nature savvy and seemed floored at what we just witnessed. I asked him if that could have been a big bear. He answered with a resounding no. That was no bear and it was no moose. It was the biggest man I've ever seen, or it was Bigfoot, but too dark to see details. I laughed and said there's no such thing. I read a story that said it was just made up. But Jim insisted they do exist and we'd just seen one dive into the lake. He must be right, because who would dive into that black pitch lake in the middle of the night? If it ever surfaced, we didn't see it. He visibly got chills and started to shiver. He went quiet for a while and said, "I wonder if you realize how rare what we just saw is." I didn't know what to say, but in my mind, I thought he really thinks that thing was Bigfoot. He continued to shiver from exhaustion and probably excitement. As tired as we were that night, we didn't sleep much until almost dawn. Jim seemed awed by it. I didn't know what to think. We slept in until almost noon Sunday. We went down to the water's edge where this thing was last seen. There was one clear half of a barefoot print in the mud, pointing toward the water. The heel to the little toe showed, and Jim figured it to be about 14-15 inches long at that point, but longer at the big toe's end. That part now was lost in the muck and the mire. The heel width was about 6 inches, the span of my hand, and I think the heel was 6 inches wide. Neither of us could be certain about the length, since the big toe and the second toes were under the water. The heel depth was at least 3.5 inches deep. Jim was very quiet and reflective on the trek home, and preoccupied. During the drive, he told me nobody would ever believe us and we ought to stay quiet about the whole incident. Story 2. I have a story for you from Maine. This event took place 35 years ago, but I remember like it was yesterday. My father and I were fishing for brook trout in northern Maine woods in 1988. I would have been around 13 years old at the time, and my father was 38. It was a beautiful early summer day, and the fish were biting. This particular area in the Maine woods is extremely thick and dark, almost gives you a feeling that someone or something is watching you. We were wading down the brook when we noticed the half-eaten remains of a snowshoe hare lying on the bank of the brook. On closer examination, we noticed that the head of the hare was half-eaten. My father did not think too much of it, since he is an avid outdoorsman and seen nature at work before, but myself, a young boy, was amazed at the sight. After poking and prodding at the remains with a stick, moved on down the brook. We also noticed the water in the brook had been disturbed, and since the water was moving slow, it had happened recently. Even I noticed this in my young age, but we didn't think too much of it until later that night when we recapped the amazing day. Anyway, back to the story. We had caught our limited brook trout that day and were heading back to the truck, which was parked about 5 miles away at the end of the logging road. This is the road we followed on the way out. When I say logging road, I mean an old logging road, which had not been logged in over 30 years at the time and was very overgrown, but made for easier walking than the thick cedars. We didn't talk much on the way down the road until we came across an old cabin deep in the woods. We stopped to sit down for a while and rest. We noticed a logbook on the table, and we read it, and throughout the book there were entries about the owners of the cabin seeing the ridge monster, as they called it. They gave details about the creature, which now matches ours. Rested, we walked down the trail when all of a sudden my father stopped dead in his tracks. I figured he was taking another break, so I stopped and examined some flowers on the ground. When I looked at my father, I saw a face on him I had never seen before and hoped to never see again. He was looking toward a small opening in the forest, perhaps 15-20 seconds. I became concerned and asked him what he was looking at, since female moose have their young this time of year and are usually very protective. We had seen plenty that day, when he suddenly grabbed me and told me to hurry. My father was very uneasy. We made the 5-mile trip out and back to the truck in record time, while I still had no idea why my father was in such a hurry. It was hard for me to keep up with him since I was so small, and he is a man over 6 feet tall. When we got to the truck, he told me to get in with a tone of voice I dared not disobey. On the ride home, he told me the incredible story of what he had seen. At the time we rounded a small corner in the trail, my father had caught movement out of the corner of his eye. When he looked up, he saw what could have only been and was a Bigfoot, the main ridge monster. My father described the creature as being at least 8 feet tall and estimates it weighing over 500 pounds. The creature had one long arm grasping a tree and 1 foot up on an incline in the forest floor, and remained there staring at my father and I for about 15 to 20 seconds. My father said it seemed to be bored with us all of a sudden, and it simply pulled itself up with one hand grasping the tree and silently disappeared into the woods. My father, throughout sheer terror for my sake and to maintain his sanity, never told me until we got to the truck. Imagine what I would have thought if he would have told me a 500-pound mythical creature was within 20 yards of me. I never saw the creature, only my father did, and he was amazed not only at the incredible sight itself, but the agility and stealth of it. My father and I both concluded that we startled the creature feeding on the hare down by the brook's shore. It followed us throughout the day out of curiosity while keeping its distance. When I think about all the stories I'd heard over the years and how a smell accompanies the creature, I did notice a strange smell when we stopped on the trail, but that could have been the smell of Cedar Swamp Spring. The brook has no name where we were fishing. It was early summer, late spring in 1988 at about 10 a.m. We've heard Maine Indian stories of a gentle giant, as they call it, that has lived in the Maine woods since the Indians first settled there, and many sightings have been made in modern times. My father is a well-respected man in our community and has never told anyone outside of our family, and plans to keep it that way in order to protect the animal from pursuit. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.